if you are married, but you're
Mhm.
acting in all of the ways a Christian marriage would be enacted, which you are, right? Faithful to your wife, she's faithful
Yeah.
to you.
Mhm.
You're handling your obligations as a husband. She sees you as the head of your household. All of the different, all the different variances which are there. It seems like you're kind of following the infrastructure anyhow. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And so if that's the case, I would feel like that's a point in
I'm
the
not an
favor.
atheist. I just let the record show I'm not an atheist. If you want to know
No,
what
no,
my
I know.
it's like the last chapter of my fourth book. So
But there's a secular argument to be made
there is.
for, for this. I mean, even if you don't.
So here's where it gets good, right? So Mr. Sexton's he's gonna say, well, let's just have a purely secular argument for, loosely Western biblical morals, the Ten Commandments, right? He makes this argument. Why don't we just have a secular? Because why do I have to choose a theist, grounding or a theist response? Why don't I just say that if this works, then I'll use this ethic, right? Because it's useful. It's utilitarian. And I'm playing this because I hear this all the time. So you're going to hear me give a basic response as to why that doesn't work, and hopefully it'll click with everybody why I'm playing it and why my response makes sense. And I think I made it very succinct and very clear. So here we go.
If you don't believe in God, there are a million reasons to follow the Ten Commandments. It really is not just a function of like I've never followed the argument of we would have no morality if we didn't have religion. I don't buy that. I rape and kill.
It's true that what James is saying, that person could definitely choose the principles of the Ten Commandments to live a life that benefits them so that they can flourish, so the society, functions in a moral way. That's true. But in terms of like logical argumentation in philosophy, we usually talk about grounding, because there's a difference between just a pragmatic sort of acceptance of the things because it works versus, is it coherent? Can you actually demonstrate a basis for the ethics beyond just kind of a pragmatic, well, it works for me, it's a subjective thing, I like it, going beyond that and saying that, okay, but how does this work? How is it possible that there's right and wrong? So the argument is out of the domain of like subjectivity and pragmatism and into the domain of whether there's a coherent account for the ethics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes.
So once again, as you can imagine, the point here we always have to stress is that in philosophy, there's this thing called justification, and it's not, and more specifically in epistemology, which is a branch of philosophy. A lot of people think, and I think James probably thinks this as well, I'm not knocking him, just stating because this is typically what people think. They think that, well, philosophy is this thing that kind of, spurgy people do who go to university, and it's just its own kind of world. It doesn't relate to the rest of the world, the world of law and politics and whatever else, right? But what they're failing to understand is that once you engage in rational debate and discourse, no, you're actually in the domain of philosophy, even if you don't know it. And that's the hardest thing to get people to understand, is that you're in the domain of philosophy, even if you don't know it. And what I tried to do is make an analogy to law, to James, right? Because, if I'm driving down the street, I'm subject to the laws of traffic, even if I don't even know what the local traffic laws are. Maybe there's ordinances about how, you can't, I don't know, make a left turn in a downtown, Court Square area, and I do it. But I didn't know that ordinance. Well, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm still subject to the ordinances, even if I don't know them. So likewise, in the domain of ethics, in the domain of philosophy and epistemology, if you make a knowledge claim, you claim to know something, you're subject to the rules and laws of thought, whether you know them or not. Thus, you can't irrationally make moves or non sequiturs, right, that don't work. It's kind of like chess, and I make a chess analogy here in a second, where I say that just because you don't know all the chess rules, like you can't come to the chessboard and say, oh, well, I brought, here's my checker piece, and here's my Monopoly man, and stick all these different things on the board and start doing whatever you want, or flip the board over and say I won. Those violate the rules. So most people just simply don't understand that there's such a thing as laws of thought, rules of thought. That's all logic is. And they're not arbitrary. They're laws and rules that reflect actual metaphysical principles because they directly relate to the true and the false, the good and the bad. So that's where I was trying to kind of introduce the topic here in this discussion. And hopefully you'll notice that. And here's what's interesting is that he was a great guy to talk to. We had a great 3-hour interaction there. Really smart guy. But I still don't think he understood what I meant by justification, because I think a lot of people, when they hear that word, they think of it in sort of the colloquial sense, right? They think of justification as like, I'm justified in what I say to you because I have the right, something like that. What we mean is giving good reasons for beliefs. And they have to be good reasons in the sense of being coherent with the rest of our beliefs, the rest of our reasons for our beliefs. So it can't just be any old reasons. Oh, I believe 2 + 2 is 4 because I had a dream. And in my dream, Bill Cosby appeared and said, feeble follows evil's owl, 2 + 2 is 4. So therefore, that's why I think 2 + 2. That's a bad reason. Even though it's true, it's not a good reason. So justification is just simply giving good reasons for our beliefs, because we want to have some reason for our belief. If we don't have any reasons, then our beliefs are completely irrational. That doesn't make me a rationalist. It just makes me rational. Two different things. Rationalism is a system or a kind of all-encompassing philosophy where everything is exhaustively explainable and definable in some, worship of reason sense. That's rationalism. Not the same thing as being rational. It's two different things. Just like having an idea, it's not the same thing as idealism in philosophy. And when I say idealism, I'm not using it in the colloquial sense. I don't mean idealistic 20-year-olds who believe that they can instantiate world socialism. No. Idealism, the philosophy that all that exists is ideas, like Plato, like Hegel. That's what I mean. So we're like 2 or 3 levels removed from pop normal discourse. So people don't even know what we're talking about when they hear the words. They think we're using the words in the colloquial sense, right? Like person in theology, right? Oh, you're talking about just a dude. No, that's not what person is in theology. It's much more nuanced than that. It's charitable and nuanced. So let's see how he replies to the basic encapsulation that I gave, that things need to have good reasons behind them, not just any old reasons.
Sense to me. I think I don't know that it gets us any further though in terms of the logic of it, because I think ultimately you could look at it purely as a societal function, right? You could just say, well, these are the principles around which an ordered society should be put together. Or you could look at it even from just a broader experience of the self, right? So if you look at, for example, like how Judaism views hell, it doesn't view hell as a place. It views hell as a state of being outside the grace of God and of that you are in hell when you sin, meaning that you make your life into hell by sinning. So in that situation, even if I think you take, theology out of it, if it could be, an atheist could say, yeah, I see how I feel when I'm hurtful to others. I see how that has a blowback repercussion effect that causes, when I hurt someone, it causes them to be more inclined to hurt someone. And therefore it devolves and moves us in a negative direction as opposed to a direction where people can thrive and be happy. So I don't know that, again, I think when we start with a religious principle, it's always much, much easier. I think whatever that religion would be it's because you can't argue with it. Like I can't possibly say to you, what would you accept as proof that God doesn't exist? Like there's no answer to that for you, I assume.
So just a couple assumptions that I'm sure you guys have already seen here, unproven sort of assumptions or not demonstrated yet assumptions that somehow theology is antithetical to rationality and reasoning, right? Which is just simply not true. Of course, we don't think that, but everybody post-Enlightenment and post-Schleiermacher, post-Kant, they have thought, the world has thought that reason is antithetical to revelation or to theology. And we, of course, have a totally different paradigm that the only case for reasoning is theology. The only grounding or justification for reason itself is divine revelation and theology. So it's flipped backwards the way that most people think of it. And I'm sure you perceptive, beautiful Jay's Analysis Chad nerds in the audience also recognized the assumption that society can choose these things to work and for the good. To work to do what? The good for the common good. The good of what? What is that? Because now we're in the domain of ethics and metaphysics. And so ultimately what we're going to see is that the account given is utilitarian. And I'm not knocking people who think that. I mean, that's just sort of the, it's the zeitgeist we live in. It's the air we breathe is utilitarian ethics. And other things kind of connected to that, like consequentialist ethics, right? These are all, post-atheist, post-enlightenment, post-revolutionary thought versions of ethics connected to things like empiricism, connected to Jeremy Bentham, connected to David Hume, right? What's our ethic going to be if there's no God? Well, we'll just pick the most maximum amount of happiness for the maximum number of people. And that becomes the good. Of course, happiness, what does that mean? Is that pleasure principle? Does that mean if we're in a rat maze and we're, the rats hit the coom button and they're all just coomed out, but they're happy all day? Well, that's the perfect utilitarian society. If we're talking about a happiness principle, right? So it's just moving the can back a step. I love mixing up my metaphors, right? It's kicking the problem down the road. It's moving the can back a step. Right? So it's just one step back. But I think a lot of people who are educated, very intelligent people like Mr. Sexton, they see things like the good, an appeal to the common good, an appeal to what works or what is pragmatic or utilitarian. They see that as kind of like a higher level appeal, but they ignore or they don't want to get into the next logical question, which is, well, what is the good? What does it mean to have utility? Utility for what?
I assume you have faith in God, and proof denies faith to some degree. So I don't. I understand the point of view you're positing. I just don't. I think there is secular morality. I think that it is as difficult to articulate as your reasons for believing in the existence of God. It's
well, of course, the fact that there is secular morality was not the question. We know that there is secular morality. The question is, as I posed already, but how do we give an account for it and justify the belief in that? And so the response was, well, theology is difficult and giving an account for any kind of ethic is difficult, but secular ethics exists. Yeah, but that wasn't in question. The question was the justification for its existence.
That there is something in you that knows what is right and knows what is wrong. You have a moral instinct, and again, instinct is a problematic word, right? Like Neil Postman, who's one of my mentors at NYU, said, instinct is just the word we put on for something we don't understand. So it's the equivalent of saying, hey, why didn't the sun rise today? Oh, because today is sun does not rise day, and accepting that as a logical argument. But I do think there is something within all of us, and whether someone wants to call that God's light or whether someone wants to just call that a moral sense, I think that exists, and that can be a compass point for people, just like faith in God. That was longer than a minute, sorry.
Well, it's true that people have a moral sense, but why? Why would there be an innate moral sense? And I'm sure he would say, well, it's just an evolutionary kind of thing that developed to help society, make it and move, have the next generation, right? Because if you don't have these moral norms, then the species won't survive. But that doesn't give an account for whether it's right or wrong. I mean, maybe it's bad for us to have that. Maybe we shouldn't have a moral center. Maybe having a moral center is what holds us back from conquering and taking over, right? Maybe we give a Nietzschean response. Now, I'm not saying that he believes that, but I'm saying that you see how already it's just completely kind of blown past the question that was asked.
Divinity raises the humanity in Christ through theosis, and that's exactly what we experience.